In this episode, we consider what the suggestion that Taylor Swift and her relationship with NFL star Travis Kelce is a psyop really means about our political and our media culture. And in part two of our discussion, we'll discuss hobbies and why science is telling us that having hobbies is really good for us. Hello, welcome to the Call Like I See It podcast. I'm James Keys, and riding shotgun is a man who's all about restraint, even about things that he's excited about. Tunde Ogunlana. Tunde, you plan to do anything special to, let's say, curb your enthusiasm today?
Well, I guess I got to find a way to restrain myself. So let's see. Sure. Let's see how this goes.
All right. Now, before we get started, if you enjoy the show, I ask that you please hit subscribe on YouTube or on your podcast app. It really helps us as far as getting the show in front of people. Now, we're recording this on February 4th, 2024. And Tunde, in the past week, we've seen a relationship between a famous pop star, Taylor Swift, and a star NFL tight end, Travis Kelce, morph into the latest conspiracy in the minds of some Americans. Presumably, somehow this is connected to an effort to discredit them in advance because they expect that these Americans may expect that at least Swift, would endorse or support Joe Biden later this year as president. So what stands out to you with this, seemingly out of nowhere, but real obsession in terms of discrediting Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce that's coming out from the right wing?
Well, if I can stay subdued and temper my passions here, I would use a term that I saw someone else use, so I'm not going to take credit for it, but I laughed when I heard it, which is it's a WMD, but in this case, it's a weapon of mass distraction.
There you go.
So, I'm just thinking about how much I've been overwhelmed in recent years from all of these just hysterical issues like when they had the tranny on the beer can, or the Dr. Seuss stuff, or the gas stoves, or the caravans from years ago coming to the southern border with 200 people. And, all these, or even birtherism, right? Yeah. That all these things that enter our media space that are really designed, I think, to deflect. And I think there's a lot of different actors and motivations behind the scenes, and a lot of reasons why we all have to suffer, talking about this, including us right now, which I find interesting, but which is what I know we'll get into. But I think that's kind of what I make of it. I mean, look, to finish up my thought is I feel sorry for these two kids, Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce, because I know they're doing very well. So I mean,
yeah, that's what the money is for, sorry, right?
But, you're trying to have a relationship, and these, people are coming out of the woodwork with these stupid things. I mean, it reminds me of birtherism. People just making stuff up, and then other people believe it. And it's just like, what do you do about that?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I can see that. I mean, the fame and popularity and the money, this kind of comes with the territory. So, I think that like they're Travis Kelce, Taylor Swift, they're big boys, big girls, they're big boy, big girls. So, I mean, I'm sure they can take that. But yeah, it's unfortunate. It reminds me of high school in the sense that, and we talked about this a bit offline, that, like this is like, the prom queen and prom king or something like that. And then you got a segment of people that are just hating on them and just mad about, pick whatever reason, they're mad about, oh, this person did this, or this person is really that, and all this other stuff. So it really comes off in a way, like, I'm not going to say juvenile, but it comes off in kind of a high school social strategy.
Well, I'll say it. You're right. I mean, in my opinion, that's one word I thought of in preparing for today. This is juvenile.
But when you look at it and along like a lot of the other things that you mentioned, it's taking something that appears, at least to me, and I know you share this sentiment, to be relatively trivial, a relationship between, a singer and a football player, and almost centering it in terms of, okay, this is something that's so important in terms of our political world, or, something like that. And also, I mean, the other thing about it, not just so important, but make it seem sinister. And the crazy thing about making it seem sinister is the idea that, and again, this is something else you and I mentioned offline, was just that if you're looking, Taylor Swift endorsed Joe Biden in 2020. So it would be expected. It wouldn't be out of the ordinary for her to do it this year. But now it's like, okay, we're going to do this now so that we can make something that's expected to happen seem sinister, seem like, it's something else. Like, it's crazy because she's already, super famous. Like, she sells out concerts, like, with the same, she'll be at the same venue night after night after night after night and sell it out the whole time. She make a movie of the concert and that'll sell $100 million dollars in tickets. Like, she doesn't need more publicity, so, but you take this idea, like, I was doing all this for more publicity, and it's like the scale of it doesn't even make sense. But I don't think it's supposed to make sense. I think, again, it's supposed to be something that you can put in people's minds, and then therefore they will doubt and or kind of look at something with suspicion when it organically this was likely to happen anyway.
Yeah, and I think, I want to go back to something you said because this actually allows me to tie it into the idea that this is juvenile. You alluded to that this is like high school. And I remember hearing when I was younger, in my early 20s and all that, you would hear there were studies or people talking about in the scientific community that most of us humans, or at least in our society maybe, never kind of emotionally go much further than where we were at high school.
Yeah, like a social development. I've heard that same thing. Like social development, high school for most is the pinnacle. Like everything is about what it's going to be for the rest of your life is what you see there.
Yeah, and let's be very clear here. Yeah, I'm glad you did made a distinction there. Social development, and that's what I mean by emotional, not intellectual. Not that we don't keep learning and all that. So I just want to be clear about that. But the idea that popularity, like you said, the prom king and queen image that these two kind of look like the all-American kids. And one is, like you said, a woman that is commanding her own business empire, all that, who's been famous since a very young age. And we've never heard really her be in trouble with the, drugs, the law, or anything like that. And then you got this young man who literally is kind of the all-American looking kid, a Midwestern kid from Ohio that's a football player and very good
all-American sport, and
he plays a Kansas City
position. Kansas City.
Yeah. He's born in the Midwest and plays for a team in the Midwest. And so my point is just that if your allusion to prom king and queen is interesting because I was seeing something else that makes some interesting allusions to this because they said, a little bit, I don't want to blanket this, we got millions of people in this country, so that everybody's like this. But someone I saw said, people are triggered also by seeing people like Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift be together and have so much public adoration about it. They can be triggered based on where they were in high school. So if they were at the bottom of the pecking order in high school, maybe this triggers them like when they were in 11th or 12th grade, and the prom king and queen, everyone's paying attention to them, but they feel like, well, what about me? And then, we talked about it. You and I were athletes in high school. I played high school basketball. You played high school football. And not to say we were the coolest kids in the school, but naturally, when you have a collective group, like being on a team sport, and especially a popular sport like football, baseball, or basketball, generally, we weren't intimidated by the cool kids in school because we kind of were around that already. I'm not going to say I was the coolest guy in school, but just being, 6'4" by the time I was 15 in high school, and then being on the basketball team meant that unintentionally I was already a little bit higher on the pecking order just by the way humans organize themselves.
The concept you're talking about is kind of like a resentment, like
exactly.
Depending on where you were at a certain time of your life, and again that being a very formative time of your life. If we're talking about high school and social stratification, there may be a built-in resentment that the actors who want to look at this as something other than what it is can maybe tap into, and when people, and that this resentment that was already there and say, hey, this is kind of like that, or at minimum to make it mimic something like that. So that could be something. I'm sure that's part of the stew as to why this thing.
That's what I'm saying. I don't want to blame everybody because there's millions of people, but like you said, it could be part of the ingredients. And to your point, I think this is why the ecosystems of media that are continuing to push on this narrative, you say something very important. They understand the ability to trigger people psychologically and emotionally. Yeah. And you're right. Well, and then, someone might be, these feelings might be dormant in someone generally, but when triggered by the right messaging and all that, all of a sudden they do feel that resentment.
Yeah, so and to your point, this is something I wouldn't have seen coming. Like, to me, I'm looking at this, and this is somewhat rational and then somewhat just kind of emotionally, like, Taylor Swift doesn't need more publicity. She'll always, take advantage of it if she gets it, but she doesn't need it. She's the most popular pop star in the world, at least as far as the measurements that we have. And Travis Kelce, his team, he's won 2 Super Bowls, been to another one. Like, it's not like he's some up and comer, that he's on the back end of his career. He's not like, he's been around.
I'm just laughing, James. The conspiracy theory would be if they put me on an NFL field.
Yeah,
and my team went to the Super Bowl. That would be the conspiracy.
Where'd this guy Tunde come from?
This 46-year-old guy with a bad back and busted up knees and tore the. All of a sudden, he's running down the field scoring touchdowns. That's a conspiracy.
That would be a psyop.
That would be a psyop.
If we can make that happen, let's make it happen. So
I would love for that to happen, because then I'd be making NFL money.
All in effort to boost the podcast.
That would mess me up, though, because we'd have to allude to our last show about polyamory when I explained to my wife what Taylor Swift's doing in my box.
You're reaching back on that one.
Yeah. No, I got to figure out when Taylor's in the box with my wife, I'd have to figure that one out. That's my
Hey, well, like we said last week, polyamory seems to be having a moment. So you at least would have a shot. But no, I mean, I think that when you look at it, like, you see how it can be, how this can be leveraged. Because like I said, looking at it from my standpoint, I'm just amazed that this gets so much traction amongst 2 people who are already very famous and, again, are not even directly in the line of fire with politics. But it happens. It happens.
James, that's why it does make me think of birtherism. Think about, for people like me and you, the irrationality in 2013, hearing that, like, really? You think this guy wasn't born? Why?
Because, and you guys just figured this out now? Yeah, like, all of these other people.
Like, he was in the Senate since, like, 2000.
Yeah.
I never heard about any of that. He was never a Muslim terrorist sleeper cell guy until 2009.
Yeah.
That's when it all started. So it's
but a lot of these, and I want to keep us moving, but a lot of these things, and that's what stands out about him sometimes, is how convenient the explanation is, or the purported explanation is, that's given at a given moment becomes. Yeah. It's like, okay, well, all of this other stuff has been happening, but we're going to take this moment in time and say that, oh, yeah, well, all of this other stuff actually was just a game to get us to this moment. And, like, this kind of stuff never happens organically, when that kind of stuff happens organically all the time. So, it's seeing order. Some of this, though, and I want to mention this piece before I move on, is just that seeing order amongst the chaos of life is something that humans do. I mean, this is why we see constellations. This is why we see shapes and figures and clouds and so forth. So it's not the craziest thing in the world that people would see some type of order in this. But to immediately jump to the political, this is about political campaign or presidential campaigns and trying to convince people of this and that. It's just like, you're putting a lot of things together to fit some narrative that, you're like, there's also much simpler, Occam's razor, simpler explanations is that, hey, this popular guy got with this popular girl, and they just made
That's why it reminds me of birtherism, because it must have been too boring just to believe that some dude from Africa came to U.S. to study and met a white American young lady, and they fell in love and had a kid. That was just too difficult to understand. So you had to twist
even
yourself.
Even though that is a pretty, like, that's not something
that's not uncommon, right? Yeah, exactly. And so, and then the same thing here. Yeah, and the same thing here is for 2 celebrities to hook up. Like, that's not something new, right? Like, and 2 famous
and
people.
And for Taylor Swift to endorse Joe Biden, that's not new.
Yeah, that's
so
not new.
So you're taking all these things that are kind of ordinary and trying to put them together and say, oh, this is something to watch out for. And it's like, well, it's kind of just kind of the normal. But all right, the term psyop has been brought up. And, so I want to kind of open it up here and just kind of understanding the nature of psyops. And, these psyops can go from pretty mundane and, just Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, and stuff like that. It could be stuff like that, or it could be something that could be more sinister. Things that have been proven to be more difficult, but nonetheless, it can be that. What do you make of the idea that people like that's where people ran to this? It's something like, oh, this relationship, or the Chiefs going to the Super Bowl, or all of it together is a psyop meant to pull the wool over people's eyes, or something like that.
It's about as mature an idea as the deep state. That's what I think about it. Meaning, I understand that they're
ironically asserting that there is a deep state, could be considered a psyop as well. But I'll get to that when I make my point.
My point is just like, do I recognize that the United States government has lied to Americans and even sometimes done things against the interest of its own citizens, like J. Edgar Hoover's FBI, spying on Martin Luther King and telling him to go kill himself, and COINTELPRO, the Tuskegee experiment, right? I mean, let's not start going into all the ways that we know the government has done things against its people, and even things like the Pentagon Papers when they came out that creates distrust. So I'm not saying I'm naive to the idea that the government can go rogue against its own people, not just here, but any nation.
Or parts of the government.
And we need to be vigilant of that as citizens and all that. Of course, I understand that. But this idea that the deep state in the way that it is in the modern American right-leaning culture is just as, to me, immature as this type of Psyop explanation for Taylor Swift. And here's why. First of all, the idea of the Psyop, it sounds like something that could be sinister, just like the deep state. So it's got a cool sounding thing to be scared of. And then, like I've said in recent shows, that all of these hysterical things, they just forced me to go look them up. And I was fascinated, actually. I started looking up the definition of what's a psychological operation and the history of it. And, it's really it's what I was reading. Psychological warfare goes back human history because of just how we operate. But it's as documented as early as The Art of War from Sun Tzu, which was written 2,500 years ago. So psyops is nothing new. Now, the use of psychological operations in the 20th century is what we're talking about in kind of the way that we think of it today, that we're trying to change the hearts.
Because that would include the 21st century as well.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking about for kind of post-World War II, and then the development of the CIA and the studies that were done in the 50s and 60s. And, and the CIA, some things came out that didn't make them look good, like the program MK Ultra in the 1960s, where they were trying to do experiments on brainwashing people and all that. And from what I was reading is there's all these different levels of psychological operations. You know what the most effective ones are? They're the ones that tell the truth.
Yeah.
That's it. No, they were getting into it. Like they were actually getting into like the Russian influence on our 2016 election. And as much as there's evidence that the Russians infiltrated 160 million Facebook accounts and all that, the conclusion was that it may not have affected the outcome of the election to the point where some people feared. And on the flip side, there were other examples of, like you're saying, Radio Free Europe, Voice of America, what the U.S. was doing during the Cold War. They said that didn't really lead to a bunch of revolutions in Eastern Europe. I mean, you had one in Hungary in 56 and one in Czechoslovakia in 68. So if we were doing that for 40 years, it's not like we got a great track record of our psyop. But what helped us beat the Soviets was the truth. Just saying, look at your condition compared to ours. Look what you're getting from an authoritarian kind of communist closed economy versus us with a democratic open capitalist system.
Yeah.
So that's why I feel like this psyop illusion right now is another example, like the deep state illusion, is just a weapon of mass distraction to say, look over here, because of the fear and insecurity that besides that, there's nothing for this group of people to show, I guess, people they feel are their constituents. I want to hand it back, but
I look at it, I think it's a little more simple than that. Like, I think the psyop frame is a projection. If you are a person who is trying, like you're looking at a psyop, you're looking at, it's the effort to convey, I'll take this from Wikipedia. You convey selected information and indicators to audience to influence them, to influence their motives, yada, 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 to influence them psychologically. Well, if you're running a psyop, if you're running a psychological operation on an audience to, let's say you have an information silo and you want to keep people inside an information silo and you want them to get all their information from you. And you try to discredit any other source of information, things like that, then you're a hammer at that point, and everything else looks like a nail to you. And so, of course, like if you're running psyops, or what you do, whether you consider it a psyop or not, but if what you're doing is trying to convey selected information to people to get them to think a certain way or feel a certain way or react a certain way, then you're going to see that other people are doing that, whether they're doing it or not. Because again, you're anything that you see, you're purporting your own motives on top of that and your own actions on top of that. So to me, we talk commonly about, the way social media is used in general from an engagement standpoint is ripe for psychological operations. In fact, psychological operations have proved to be very effective from a monetary standpoint, from the social media standpoint in terms of what drives engagement. And so there are psychological operations going on. Some are, kind of, you can consider sinister. Some are just trying to get you to part from your money. in terms of, like this is what everybody's doing, so to speak. Everybody's buying a Tesla, better buy a Tesla type of thing. So, but if you're looking at it from a pure, like a military intelligence standpoint, and which is where a lot of times when people throw this term out, that's what they're really talking about. The Psyop thing doesn't really add up, in this type of situation. And so to me, and I say that because there's all these disparate parts that they don't lead to some concrete result or concrete, kind of objective, which is military oftentimes operates like that. They're trying to take this hill, or they're trying to do this and that. This is just some kind of general, because Taylor Swift is liked, and if, then Joe Biden, it's, the objective isn't even clear. It's just like, okay, well, yeah, Taylor Swift, the most popular person in the world, is trying to get marginally more popular or marginally more coverage, so that when she does something she was already going to do, it's like, it doesn't really add up. And again, that the military, the military is going to put all this time and resources into something like this. And so to me, I look more so at the nature of it. This makes me look at the, go ahead.
Yeah. I was going to say, don't forget that the military is woke and is focusing too much on DEI. That's why they have time for this.
Well, but now we're back to the buzzwords, like all this other, which again, go to my idea of that there's psyops going on all the time, like the use of woke is a psyop, so that when the selective information is, I'll show you very specific things about what it means to be woke. And then the reaction I'm trying to form it in you is that anytime you hear that word or see something, you associate it with a negative kind of feeling and emotion, So again, this kind of stuff is happening all the time. That it would be a Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce thing to me is just, it's such a remote connection. So to me, that's why I end up with, okay, that's a projection, because somebody is seeing order there where, again, two popular, a popular athlete and a popular singer get together. That's not cause of much, like that. That's not very, like, novel,
But here's the thing, and this is why it's sad, it's immature, and it's dangerous for our society as a whole. Because normally, things like
before
this,
you go there, because that is the other shoe. What I just wanted to contrast. A psyop. If you want me to believe it's a psyop, they would be like Taylor Swift dating Joe Biden. Then I'd be like, okay, yeah. All right. We don't see that much. Then I'd be like, okay, yeah, maybe we're looking at psyops then, because I don't see how I don't see that kind of thing happening that often.
Well, remember, I just saw on my newsfeed, Hugh Hefner's widow apparently wrote a book, and she was 26, and when she married him, he was 85. So, stranger things have happened.
That's Hugh Hefner, though. That's not Joe Biden.
I'm just joking, but but just to get back to the reality here is, what makes this different, I think, than normal BS and conspiracy theories and stuff like that kind of have permeated our society forever. And I'm sure every society in the world has had some version of a certain percentage of its population that's a little bit just rogue in how they think. And that's why they're called the fringe. They're on the fringes of society. And so, and these people and this mindset used to be on the fringe. And what's dangerous is that we have political leaders who embrace this. And so this is where I'm getting at as to the why, in my opinion.
Well, that goes back to what I was saying before, is how this type of stuff, it seems to drive engagement in a way that can be monetized and also used for political benefit online nowadays. But
I get that. But
so it makes sense why they would endorse it, though, because they can benefit directly in a way that maybe they couldn't have directly benefited from it on a large scale in 1985.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm sure there's various factors, and I think that could be included in it, right? Like we say, the ingredients, that could totally be included. Where I'm going with this is, I don't want to go too far back, but in the recent years, right, there's been a lot of negative stuff that's happened just in our society. If you look at it from a top-down level, we had an insurrection on January 6, 2021, which, again, this side of our political establishment in our country has been doing nothing but try to cover up the reality of that, right? Then we had
meaning, it was a fake, it
was an inside job by the FBI, but somehow the people in the prison are victims and all that stuff, right?
Entrapment.
So correct. And this all comes from remember, one of my mentors once told me, if you start off whatever you're doing off kind of either a bad decision or the wrong kind of footing, every single thing you're doing after that is trying to correct that original mistake. And in this case, I mean, I wasn't planning on going here in the conversation, was really this embracing of the closest thing we've had to a dictator in our country, which is Donald Trump by the GOP. And I don't mean that to be partisan. What I mean is that Donald Trump has a bad track record since 2018. Republicans lost the Congress. He lost the presidency by double the amount of popular votes he lost in 2016, even though he won the Electoral College in 2016. Then we were supposed to have a red wave in 2022 with all the inflation and the bad economy and a down stock market. Republicans weren't as successful because the Trump endorsed candidates and the candidates that endorsed the big lie lost. This is so unpopular with most Americans. And so what I'm getting at is I realize the Psyop is what a lot of this coming out of the right wing, because they want to deflect from that bad news and also the good news in the country. So in the last 60 days, what do we learn? Good news. The Dow Jones, one of the benchmarks for the stock market, hit 37,000, an all-time high in December, followed up by 38,000 this year in January. The S&P just hit a new record in January of 2024. Our GDP, gross domestic product, just topped 5% for the first time in probably a decade. I mean, it's been a long time since we had that. Unemployment still at a record low. Last Friday, the economists estimated we'd produce 176,000 jobs as a nation. We produced 353,000 jobs. And today, we are producing more oil than ever before in the United States. The real negative is immigration. But my point is that because there's good news on the overall metrics of the United States, and it's a disaster in the GOP, the PSYOP to me is deflecting the public, trying to deflect with stuff like this and an insecurity that Taylor Swift's going to motivate people to vote.
Yeah, and the proof is in the pudding on that. We've done recent shows, separate shows, about how the crime rate and about the economic performance in the country, and how public perception is so much more negative than the actual numbers are for this. And the question is always, well, why is that? Why do people have such a disconnect in terms of how things are actually going versus how they feel things are actually going? And a PSYOP would be a good answer for that. Okay, well, let's have a PSYOP. I mean, exactly. The other one, I think the most famous, what you could consider PSYOP that's happened recently is the big lie. Like that was a psychological operation meant to convince large numbers of people that an election that was clearly lost wasn't in fact lost, and to maintain people's conviction in that despite the inability to prove the claims. Because again, remember, there was an opportunity to prove all that stuff, and that there was a failure. On behalf of
still an opportunity now.
Well, but I mean, they've already failed.
I'm just saying,
they couldn't prove any of the stuff they were saying, and so it became they utilized the PSYOP to, okay, well, you fell flat on your face as far as trying to prove this stuff, but we want people to still believe it, and so you're in a place where the majority of registered Republicans still believe that the election was stolen, despite the fact that there's never been evidence of that, and that you can point to a PSYOP for that, to persuade them of this. And I mean, I think the biggest concern I have is that it seems like conspiracy and a rejection of reality, at least certain parts of reality, are becoming part of a partisan identity. And that whatever is actually happening is less important to providing a narrative that people can get behind and feel good, or that's engaging and so forth. And so, anything that you see that whoever the people who are driving these narratives, if they're coming from the right wing, anything they don't like is about something being rigged or something being it couldn't be organic. If I don't like it, it has to be coming from some kind of organized thing, And so to me, that's a really cynical way to look at everything. And then to utilize your tools, again, which it could be called a PSYOP, not even necessarily a Department of Defense PSYOP, but just one that is something that's designed to use selective pieces of information to persuade people of certain things. It becomes part of just that's what we do. That's who we are, so to speak. Is that okay? We're going to focus on certain things, as you pointed out. A very good way to distract people from things that would be considered good news and make them oblivious to the fact that, hey, the economy is performing great. Hey, crime seems to be going down, things like that. And I guess, like you said, there is bad news. If you want to focus on, immigration and the fact that we can't get anything done to resolve that, there's bad news there. But see, part of the problem with that is that the messaging coming from the right on that is that we don't want to solve it right now. We don't want to solve that while Joe Biden is in office. So that
see, let me stop you there, because
but I want
that's
to
a very interesting.
Real quick.
Well, that was an interesting thing you bring up, because think about it. This is where I think this is why it's sad for the electorate and people that consume this type of media. Think about, for years now, it's been an existential threat at the border, to the point where former President Trump had started that policy of separating kids from their parents. Remember, and again. We go from that to now being told, okay, well, now just leave the border open until he gets back in office, because we can't trust now that the actual grown-ups in the Senate, the Democrats and Republicans, actually got together and try to change something. And this is the danger of all this. The Republican Party, in terms of, in certain instances in the last year or so, have actually extracted a lot of things out of Democrats. Remember, Joe Biden said he wasn't going to negotiate with Kevin McCarthy over shutting down the government. 30 days later, Kevin McCarthy got him to stop with the funding of the IRS. He got him to reduce some of the stuff into some of the bills they had and the spending on green energy, all that stuff. And how was he rewarded for actually getting his opponent, the opposition party, to get off of their, to sacrifice some of their stuff? He was kicked out, right? And so now we have the example again where Democrats understand, Joe Biden understands, the immigration is his Achilles heel. So for the first time, the Republicans got them to the table where the Democrats have the most conservative version of an immigration bill that they've ever had, at least probably in the last 30 years, willing to sign. And now the Republicans want to blow it, not all of them, but this group of people on the right want to just blow it up. So this is where it becomes dysfunctional. Because
this isn't where it becomes dysfunctional. This is just another illustration of how
maybe the evidence, yeah. And that's what I'm saying. It's fascinating that it's all it's all kind of this result of this ongoing psyop, where I think that base can never be satisfied, and that's the danger, because until they're told that the people that they should trust are somehow in control, they don't trust the system. And that's the really sad part. And I'll just finish this off and then hand it back to you. When I discuss those positive things about the last 60 days in terms of the stock market hitting records and our GDP, I'm not coming at that because I like Joe Biden and I'm not a Democrat. I'm an American and I love this country. And I think we have an awesome system, which is designed for either party to be in power, and the system keeps going. And the sad part is that what we're talking about is there's a psyop on enough Americans that they no longer trust the system, and that's the dangerous part, that they can be led this easily in these directions.
Well, it's not the first time that's happened, though. I mean, you see that a lot of times
we did have a civil war.
Then when people aren't given what they want out of the system, some people are okay with kind of the way the system is supposed to work, and you're not supposed to get your way all the time. And other people want to blow up the system when they don't get their way out of the system. And so, that's kind of what you see here. But ultimately, I do want to keep us moving. Just briefly, though, because, I don't want to spend too much time on this. We've talked about this in other shows, but the technological aspect of this and how technology, and I mentioned it earlier in terms of how Psyops and the, like information silos, or the prevalence of information silos, the desire to use the features of social media, one of which is the ability to create imperceptible changes in people's behavior, how that interplays with this. And I think you made a good point earlier in terms of when you're looking at how the technological environment plays into this, and we're on the precipice of even more with the AI piece. But just looking at what we've seen over the last 10 to 15 years is that when we're looking at how social media plays into this, it takes it from it takes behaviors and beliefs that might be fringe in the traditional walks of our society, meaning 90% of the people won't engage in it, or would look at it and say that's a little much, and it has the ability to take that percentage from maybe 10% of the people that are bought into this to maybe 30 or 40% of the people that are bought into it. And that's where you get into a dangerous place with the country, leading into what we're talking about, where people are just out on the idea of the country. Either it's their show or they want to blow it up. And I think that's what we're really seeing from the technological impact here, is that the direness, the urgency with which people are viewing anything, or some people, I should say, are viewing anything that's happening in this country, is being ratcheted up nonstop. It's just everything is ratcheted up, ratcheted up, ratcheted up. And even when if so and so happens, it'll be the end. If something else, if A happens, that'll be the end. If B happens, it'll be the end. And it's never the end. These things happen, and it's never the end. If Joe Biden is elected, and the country's gonna, all this bad stuff's gonna happen, that didn't happen. It's not like that shakes anybody's faith in all the stuff they believed in before. The goalposts are just moved at that point. You're essentially, you see where the large swaths of Americans are being turned, are being walked into this kind of mindset where, and again, more than just a fringe that will probably like that anyway or susceptible to that anyway, this mindset where if they don't have absolute control, or the idea of compromise with someone else becomes the situation where they have to avoid at all costs. And the problem with that is the American system is designed to force compromise between different sides of issues. So what's your thought, as far as how the technological piece plays into this?
No, I think, I think we've, like you said, we've done various discussions on this in the past. And I think, yes, everything you said about social media and the way it's in our faces and all that, and the fracturing of sources of information has been well documented, right? Like when we were little kids, there was only so many options for news, and most people sat down once a night in the evening to watch it or read a newspaper during the day. For the benefit, just of everybody seeing every show, it's not the fracturing. You can look back at the pamphlet days, or even the newspaper days when there's 6 newspapers in a large city and they reach coming. You can look at the fracturing of information. The time from the 60s to maybe the 2000s or the 90s is more of an exception than the rule. But the difference that with social media and then our current technological environment is not just the fracturing, but also the way that those tools can be used to change people's behavior. And that's what's been documented repeatedly about how social media engages with our brains. Yeah, and I think, and that's why I wrote a few things down here, because just to make sure I don't forget, one of the negative things that is also they don't want to talk about is, the repealing of Roe versus Wade. That seems to have motivated a lot of young women. But what I'm saying, there's certain things that we're not mentioning here that I think are part of all this stew that goes back to your point about the reach of technology. Because, I mean, there's a term that's been thrown around, incel, which is men who are involuntarily celibate. And that's a large percent. Apparently, there's a large percentage of men in our society who are lonely. And I don't mean that as a joke. We've seen those studies, James, about how many men have less. In 1990, I think there was the majority of men could say they had at least 6 close relationships. And now that number is down to 2 close relationships. And then I saw some.
And when you're talking about that, you're not just talking about with relationships with women, but
not intimate. But it could be just friends, the way me and you are friends, and just talk about stuff, right? That's important to have friendships in your life. Then I read something recently that they estimate as much as 50% of American men may not have had at least one intimate partner in the last year. And these are things, I'm not making fun of it. What I'm saying is these are important things for us as humans to socialize and to be close to other people. And I think there is some truth to, this post-pandemic era. A lot of people stuck at home on their computers. They're not going out to the office as much. So we have an environment that's conducive for you to be at your house alone and to still have all this information you can pull from. And then the less you go outside, the more scary the rest of the world feels.
Yeah.
And I think we all see that. I mean, sometimes I've met someone who recently just went to Mexico. And my first reaction was from what I see on TV. Oh man, it's dangerous. And how could you go down there? I would never go. And he goes, Tunde, man, it's just like here. If you'd go into the ghetto in some big city in America and you start talking trash, someone's going to kick your butt. Yeah. But in most of us driving around these big cities don't deal with that.
Yeah.
So I just was it probably is the media stirring me up and making me feel like it's all crazy there more than
what it is. They take things that it's all possible. The things you would be aware or concerned about in Mexico are all possible. It's not made up in large part in that context. Like some things we see in the media as far as that are sensationalized, some things could be made up, but this one is one, for example, that's not really made up, but the chances of it, there's millions of people, that are doing this stuff and the vast majority of them have no issue. And so it becomes one of those things. So when you hear about the exception, the exception gets more prominence in your mind, the likelihood of that becomes more prominent. And that's a really good point as far as how technology influences us and also makes it more palatable. Technology enables people to stay home and to not go out and interact with people. if you tried to stay home all the time in 1960, you'd be bored out of your mind. There's three channels, and now you can stay home all the time. You don't have to go out for food. You don't have to go out you can stay home all the time, and you don't have to go out for groceries. You don't have to go to the grocery store. You don't have to talk to the cashier. You don't have to none of that stuff. You don't have to interact with people. Social kind of socialization. You don't have to engage in much socialization. You don't have to. Oh, I got to wait my turn in line. Oh, I was going to grab the last box of macaroni and cheese or macaroni, but somebody else grabbed it. Do I flip out, or do I say, oh, okay, yeah, man, that just messed up? All of that kind of stuff that kind of forces us to socialize and not flip out every time something doesn't go our way. That kind of stuff it can be taken away from your world.
I hope you flip out, because that'll make a good Karen video on YouTube.
Hey, man.
That was my macaroni.
That's engagement.
Exactly.
So, no, but I think, you got anything else? Because I do want to keep
it moving. Just the last piece is I was going to say, it's interesting that, and I'm offended as someone that does lean conservative to some of my viewpoints, that these people keep calling themselves conservatives. Because there's nothing conservative about their behavior, number one. Number two, it's really fascinating to me that this group of people in our country, and that's what I'm saying, I know it's not a majority, but they're loud, and there's enough that, maybe it's 25, 30%.
Enough that we got to deal with it.
Correct, yeah. That it's funny how things flip, in such a short space of kind of the history of the country. They are exactly kind of the radical left of the 60s and 70s.
I don't know if you say exactly, but I don't think you could say exactly.
Well, it's not
you
exactly,
you see a resemblance.
But there's a lot of resemblance, and a kind of rejection of mainstream society, and that everything's a lie from the government and all this stuff. And look, I'm not saying that there weren't, like I said earlier, there were reasons for some people to believe that in the 60s, primarily in the civil rights movement and all that. There seems to be less of a risk of that today for the people who are citing that they're victims of the psyops and the deep state. But I find it interesting that it's all this projection as well as the victimhood. And it's fascinating watching it all.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're seeing there is, there was a group of people who were dissatisfied with the status quo and the trajectory of the nation in 1960, and the fringes amongst them behaved a certain way. And so you can see that you can see a similarity between how the fringes amongst those who are dissatisfied with the status quo and trajectory of the of the country right now, how they behaved, how the fringes, again, we're talking about the fringes there. We're not necessarily talking about the people who want things to change or things like that, but are willing to do so within the system, or that don't look at it as we have to blow up the system in order to get these changes. It's the fringes. And that's because, and we talked about this before, the fringes oftentimes are similar than they are to each other. The fringes on opposite sides of a spectrum are oftentimes more similar to each other than they are to the moderates on the same side of that spectrum.
I'm glad you said that. I mean,
but we got to keep us moving.
No, I was just going to say, the Nation of Islam and some of these Christian nationalists we're seeing today aren't that different.
Yeah.
When you look at how they're interpreting
and there's countless
scripture.
examples of that, So, but I do want to keep us moving. We'll take a break and come back with part 2 of our discussion here shortly.